Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
The sun began to set over the horizon. The sky had been consumed by a bright orange tint with a touch of pink. That was the countryside for you. For long as I can remember, I've been absolutely fascinated by nature. It was beautiful. From the amazing views of mountain tops to the wonders of wildlife, I loved it all. It was for this reason that every year or so, 4 of my closest mates and I would drive to the base of a mountain and set up camp at the local campsite. While camping, we'd do all sorts of activities, but our time in the mountains mostly consisted of hiking. This year was no different. My mates, Jason, Thomas, Samuel, and Peter, and I were on our way to the same campsite we visit each year. It's roughly a 4-hour drive, so we would all take shifts at the steering wheel. We'd already been driving for an hour and a half. By now, we were already in the countryside, far from any urban areas. In fact, there wasn't another town for miles to come. We'd already cycled through 2 people, being me and Samuel, and it was Jason's turn at the wheel. The sun was beginning to set now. The way we had it planned, we were going to arrive at the campsite just after dark, at around 7:30 p.m. However, due to delays and detours, we were significantly behind our schedule. "We'll be lucky to make it by 10, exclaimed Samuel. "Yeah, maybe if Jason wasn't so shit at driving, we'd be at least halfway there by now," Peter moaned. "Oh, shut the hell up, Peter. It's not my fault that the highway was closed off." "All right, calm down. Just pull your leg, mate." As our long haul continued, we began our drive deeper into unknown terrain. Considering that our normal road was closed off, we were forced to take a massive detour. The turnout left us in the middle of nowhere. "Are you sure you know where you're going?" Thomas asked. "Almost looks like we're in lost." "Following the GPS. This is where it's telling me to go," Jason barked. We continued to drive for another 10 minutes or so, still in unknown terrain, when our worst nightmare suddenly became reality. "What the hell?" Jason exclaimed as the car's engine began to sputter, as the car began to lose speed. Jason pulled the car over to the side of the road just as the engine gave out. Our car had broken down in the middle of nowhere. "God damn it," I sighed, as if our situation wasn't crap enough already. "See, this is what happens when we let Jason drive," Peter said jokingly. "Fuck off, Peter," Jason snapped, violently slamming his hand on the steering wheel. "All right, calm down, guys. We'll sort this shit out," I assured everyone. "Nah, stuff you guys," Jason exclaimed as he opened his car door. "Where are you going?" "To check on the engine, you dipshit," Jason shouted as he slammed the door behind him. Then he walked to the front of the car and lifted up the bonnet. "Jesus, what's his problem?" Peter, exasperated. "Give him a break, Peter," I replied. "I'm just joshing with him. He doesn't need to take it so seriously." "Nah, mate, you got too carried away." Thomas chipped in. "Fuck off, Thomas. Don't act like you weren't in on this." "Don't tell me to fuck off, asshole." Tensions continued to rise as the guys bickered amongst each other. Jason was still behind the bonnet, checking on the engine. As everyone was arguing with one another, I took a minute to get a proper glance at our surroundings. To our left was a massive empty field. It was fenced off. There was a sign on the fence that read, "Do not enter," in all caps. In the far distance, I could barely make out some sort of structure on the horizon of the field. Presumably a barn, or something like that. To our right was a forest. Just like the fields, the forest was fenced off, this time with a sign simply reading, danger. I couldn't see anything beyond the trees. It was almost nightfall, so there wasn't much light shining down on the forest. One other thing that caught my attention was a semi-truck that was parked roughly 200 meters on the other side of the road. I couldn't tell if there was anyone inside of it, though. We were truly in the middle of nowhere. 10 minutes had passed since our car had broken down. Jason was still behind the bonnet, checking the engine. Everyone else's patience was wearing thin. What the hell's taking him so long? Peter complained. Yeah, it'll be dark any minute. I don't want to be stuck out here after the sun sets, Samuel added. They were right. We didn't have a lot of time before night would fall. I decided it was finally the time to check on Jason. I rolled down my window and stuck my head out. Oi, Jason, I shouted. You fixed the engine yet? I got no response. Jason? Are you done yet? Still no response. I opened my side door and stepped out of the car. I walked up to the bonnet. Jason wasn't there. I walked back inside the car. Is he almost done? Peter asked as I closed the door behind me. He's gone, I replied. What? What do you mean he's gone? I mean he's not there anymore. Well, did you see where he went? No. Well, hold on, let me try calling him. I dialed Jason's number and held the phone against my ear. I instantly got his voicemail. He's not picking up. Shit! Thomas exclaimed. Where the hell could he have gone? I don't know, I replied. We all just sat in silence for a second. Maybe he went over to that truck for help, Samuel said while pointing to the semi-truck across the road. All right, I'll go check, Thomas said as he stepped out of the car. We all watched as Thomas walked up to the semi-truck. Is the engine fixed at least? Peter questioned. I leaned over to the driver's seat and tried starting the engine. The car sputtered momentarily and then gave up. Nope, engine still busted. Well, let me go check on it then, Peter said as he opened his door. No, I abruptly exclaimed. Just stay here. Wait for Thomas to get back. What? Why? Peter questioned. I don't know. Something doesn't feel right, I replied. Peter stared at me questionably for a second. All right, he finally said as he closed his door. If you say so. Guys! Samuel abruptly shouted. I can't see Thomas anymore. What? I said as I glanced over at the semi-truck. Did you see where he went? He disappeared behind the truck. Shit, Peter said as he opened his door again. I gotta check on him. No, I shouted once again. Stop. Let me try calling him first. He might be in danger, you idiot, Peter shouted. Just get back in the fucking car, I shouted as I held my phone against my ear. Peter stared at me with a frustrated look in his eyes. He held his position as the phone rang. It kept ringing for a few seconds, and finally, hello, I heard Thomas's voice answer. Thomas, I shouted. Are you all right, man? Where are you? Calm down, he assured me. I'm just behind a truck. Look. I glanced back at the truck to see Thomas waving at me. Reassured, Peter sat back down in the car. Jesus, man, we thought something happened to you, I replied. What are you doing back there? Did you find Jason? Nah, but I found some supplies in the truck. Figured we could use them to fix the car, he replied, as he disappeared behind the truck once again. All right, well, just stay on the line while you're getting them, I said. Okay, if you say so. But I'll have to put the phone down to carry this stuff. All right, just stay on the call, I requested once again. Sure thing. Thomas proceeded to put his phone down and continued gathering supplies. I could hear the clanking of metal in the background of the call. The sun had just set about now. The sky was slowly being consumed by the darkness of the night. Jesus, someone's a little paranoid, Peter exclaimed as we waited for Thomas. You can talk. You were about to sprint out of the car and run after Thomas, I replied. Besides, we still don't know where Jason is. I'm seriously worried about him. Here, I'll try calling him this time, Peter said. He dialed Jason's number and held the phone to his ear. Suddenly, Peter's face was filled with horror. What's wrong? I asked. Peter didn't say anything. He just glanced at his phone and then suddenly handed it to me, still with a horrified look on his face. I held Peter's phone against my ear. Horrified, I hung up on the call and dropped Peter's phone. What the hell was that? I asked Peter. I have no fucking clue, Peter replied, still mortified. It's hard to describe, but on the other end of the call were these strange noises. It sounded like a mix of demonic screaming, crying, and other horrific, indistinguishable noises. And I can't be sure, but I think I heard Jason's voice faintly in the background of the call. I was frozen in fear for a minute, still trying to process what I had just heard. I don't know what those noises were, and I don't know what happened to Jason. All I knew was that we needed to get out of there as quickly as possible. In a flash, I grabbed my own phone, still in a call with Thomas. Thomas, you need to get back to the car right now, I shouted. I didn't get a response. Thomas, answer me! Only silence. Then suddenly, I heard the sound of a long bang in the distance. It was the sound of metal clashing, as if someone had dropped a bunch of supplies on the ground. Oh shit, it got Thomas, I shouted. What do you mean it got Thomas? What the hell is it? Samuel asked in panic. I didn't answer Samuel. Instead, I locked all of the car doors and turned off all the lights. What the hell are you doing? Peter shouted. Shut the fuck up for a second. Everyone just shut up. We all sat in silence. It was dark now, almost pitch black outside. What are you doing? Samuel whispered. Why'd you turn off all the lights? Just keep quiet and stay low. I think there's something out there, I replied. Like what? A bear or something? No, I don't know. I don't know what's out there, but whatever it is, I think it's got Jason and Thomas. We just need to stay in the car and keep quiet. Hopefully, it won't know we're here. No, man. This is crazy, Peter said, shaking uncontrollably in his chair. We gotta get out of here. Peter wasn't in a sane state anymore. No, I shouted. Stay in the car. Peter didn't try to argue with me this time. He was too scared to do anything. There was silence again. Peter was shivering in fear. I sat still, staring into the dark abyss outside our car. It was too dark to see anything. I couldn't tell if something was out there or not. Suddenly, a faint screech was let off in the distance. It didn't sound human. What the hell was that? Peter asked, horrified. My heart was racing at this point. Something was definitely out there. Something inhumane. I tried thinking of what to do next. Samuel, try calling for help. I can't. I've lost reception, he replied. Crap. We're stranded. I contemplated again, thinking of another plan. All right. We'll just have to stay calm and stay in the car no matter what. If we wait till sunrise, then we can... Are you fucking insane? Peter shouted aggressively. No way! I'm not staying in here till morning. That thing's going to kill us if we wait here. Peter then proceeded to open his side door and sprint out of the car, right into the dark abyss. Peter, no! Samuel shouted as he opened his own door. Samuel, don't go out there! He shouted. I gotta go after Peter. Samuel shouted as he ran off, leaving his door open behind him. Samuel, please stay here! But it was too late. Samuel had already ran off into the darkness. Freezing and mortified, I tried contemplating what to do next. Should I go after him? Should I try making a run for it, too? Before I could decide what to do next, I heard the sounds of screaming in the distance. It was Peter. I could also hear Samuel shouting in the distance. I couldn't make out everything that he was saying. I could only make out one of his words, my name. He was calling out to me. He was calling out for help. I just sat in the car, chilled to the bones, my eyes wide open with fear. I'm alone now. Everyone else is dead. I don't know what's out there. I don't know what to do next. Peter and Samuel left the door open as they ran out. I'm too scared to close it. I'm too scared to move. It's been 15 minutes since Samuel and Peter left the car. Every few minutes or so, I hear a screeching in the distance. It sounds closer with each screech. I'm writing this story because I don't know what else to do. I'm scared. It's dark. I'm alone. And there's something outside, slowly coming toward me. I was driving through rural New Jersey when I saw him. A hitchhiker standing by the side of the road, surprisingly well dressed. Black suit, slicked back hair, narrow briefcase. Now, I know I shouldn't pick up hitchhikers, but I'm 6'4", 230 pounds, with all kinds of hunting equipment in the back of my truck. It's not like this prissy-ass businessman is going to beat me to death and leave me on the side of the road. Besides, I need gas money. Hey, man, I said, pulling over to the side of the road. I'll give you a lift if you pay me for gas. Of course, he said in a polite, almost British accent. He reached for his wallet and pulled out 3 crisp $20 bills. Is this enough? I grinned. It's way more than enough. I greedily snatched the money from him and clicked the locks. Get in, bud. He climbed in. His blue eyes shifted from the crumpled Wendy's wrapper on the dashboard to the mysterious sticky goo on the middle console. Oh, sorry, the car's not clean. I'm going hunting, I said, turning back onto the highway. Hunting? Interesting, he said in a strangely enthusiastic tone. Have you always liked to hunt? No, it's the funniest thing. Never thought I'd ever hunt. Love animals, got 3 dogs at home. But there are so many deer around these parts when the winter comes. A lot of them starve to death, not to mention all the car accidents they cause. I trailed off and we fell into uncomfortable silence. Just hunting for the day, then? No, my buddy Matt and I will be out there the whole weekend. He let out a laugh. The whole weekend? Your wife's a saint for letting you go. My wife? Added he. But then my eyes fell on the steering wheel and the silver ring on my finger. Oh, yeah, Mary's a doll. She's actually pregnant, 5 months with a little girl. He gave me a crooked smile. A girl, huh? Yeah. I could feel him staring at me long after we had fallen into silence. It made me feel uncomfortable. I clicked on the radio. How did you meet, Matt? He asked, fiddling with the dial. All that came through was static. That's a weird question, I thought. Well, he and Mary were close friends. So, when he got married, I got to know him well. The man said. He stroked his chin thoughtfully, and I was suddenly reminded of a psychiatrist. Are you a psychiatrist? I blurted out. He laughed. Definitely not. I work in finance. What type of finance? It was my turn to ask questions now. Futures, he replied noncommittally. I glanced over at him. A small smile was on his lips, and I noticed his fingers had gravitated from his lap to the briefcase at his feet. My heart began to pound. Click, click. He undid the clasps. The case creaked open. What's in your briefcase? I asked. Work. What kind of? His long fingers disappeared into the darkness of the case. He was pulling something out. My body began to seize up. The steering wheel felt like ice under my fingers. "I have a lot of hunting equipment back there," I said, "so you better not be—" I stopped. He was only pulling out a sheet of paper. For a few minutes he was quiet, reading the paper intently and silently, as if his life depended on it. Scratch, scratch. His fingers slid over it as they traced the text. Then he slipped it back into the case and snapped it shut. What was he reading? I thought. But before I could get the question out, he turned towards me. I could barely see his face in my peripheral vision, but I knew he was staring at me for minutes on end. Then he broke the silence. "Don't go hunting," he said, his ice blue eyes boring into me. "What?" "Turn the car around. Go home to Mary." "What?" "She needs you." He paused. "Madeline needs you." I paled. I never told him we were going to name our baby Madeline. "How did you—" "He's going to make it look like an accident," he said, his voice gravelly and halting. "Just a simple hunting accident. The most punishment he'll endure is 35 minutes in the police station, writing out his statement. But let me off at that diner up ahead. I like their Cobb salad very much." "Matt's going to kill me? What are you talking about?" He turned to me, eyes wide. "What are you talking about?" "About what you just said." "All I said is I'd like you to let me off at the diner, please." He pointed to the exit, curving off the highway. "You're going to miss it if you don't slow down." With a shaking hand, I clicked on my blinker, pulled off the exit into the parking lot. My heart pounded in time with the click-click-clicks of the cooling engine. "Thank you for the ride," he said, pulling his briefcase out with him. "Have a good drive, will you?" I couldn't speak out a reply before the door slammed shut. I didn't believe him, but my nerves were too shot to continue the trip either. I texted Matt that I was sick, turned around and went home to Mary. Mary was thrilled. Matt was disappointed. A little too disappointed, if you ask me. A month later, after ignoring most of Matt's calls and texts, which became increasingly frequent and desperate, I heard a faint thumping noise at the door. When I flicked on the porch light, there was Matt, hunched over our doorknob, holding a lockpick. We called the police. Since then, life has been great. Just a few months later, our wonderful little Madeline was born, and as soon as we got back from the hospital, on our doorstep was a little teddy bear, a pink bow sewed on its head. There wasn't a return address or a card of any kind, but I think I know who it's from. Mrs. Claus sat in her rocker, a half-completed sweater resting on her lap. The alarm clock on the small table beside her rang its shrill alarm through the warm air of the house, announcing that it was now 1 a.m. She reached for it, hitting the button at the top of the light ting and silencing the sound. She cranked the dial back another hour so it would ring at 2 a.m. This was how we kept track of Santa's journey on Christmas Eve. How are those cookies looking? Chandrell opened the oven door and peered inside. The chocolate chip cookies need another few minutes. She stood and looked at the counter behind her, touching a finger to one of the cooling gingerbread men. But the gingerbread men are ready for decoration. I looked up from my piping. The sugar cookies are almost done too. Mrs. Claus beamed at us before continuing her knitting. Good, good. You girls are such perfect little elves. The kitchen counters were covered with cooling racks of sugar cookies, decorated with red and green frosting, pinwheel cookies with chocolate and coconut layers, and almond shortbread cookies dusted with powdered sugar. Several pies cooled in the window, the chilled glass absorbing their heat to create a moist fog that blurred the snowy wonderland outside. I'd made apple and pumpkin pies as well as some meat pies, with the beef left over from the cows we had in the summer. Meat pie wasn't something we normally had at the Christmas feast, but it had been Horace's favorite, and I wanted to honor him, to feel like he was still included in the celebration. My heart stung at his memory and my eyes watered. I wanted to fall to the floor and cry, but it was Christmas, and I had to put on a happy face for the younger elves. I swallowed my pain down and forced myself to smile as I worked. I would be able to cry later, in the quiet safety of the barn, away from the observant eyes of Mr. and Mrs. Claus. Once the cookies were finished baking, Charle started to roast the Christmas ham. The boys, who were now busying themselves with the stables, had slaughtered the pig earlier this week. Fresh potatoes and corn, harvested at the end of the fall, and root vegetables from the cellar would complete the feast. Santa always came back on Christmas hungry, even after eating the treats left by little boys and girls all over the world. Once he returned, we'd all celebrate the success of the holiday with him. It would be joyful to have everyone enjoy the sweet and savory treats created by me and Charle. This year there were 12 of us elves. Charle and I were the eldest. At 19, Charle was the oldest elf I'd ever known. I had always joked that it was her baking skills that kept her alive so long. I was the second eldest at 16. Until Thanksgiving, it had been Otis who had been the second oldest. He had been 17. Otis and I had been very close. Our love ran deep and constant, like the river that bordered the North Pole on the south side. Being one of the 2 oldest female elves came with a lot of privileges and responsibilities. We were not only expected to take care of the younger elves, but to help Mrs. Claus with running the house, which meant also the barn and the cellar. We were the only elves that she would entrust to protect the food storages, since some of the younger elves would be less able to fight temptation during times when food was scarce. After Charle and me was Mirren, who was 14, then there was Aerolith, who had just turned 12, and Zaltarish, who was 11. Sisten was 9, the twins, Azararwin and Bianfindor, were 8, Plufin was 7, and Aelok was 4. Then there was sweet Quoyeth, who was the second youngest at 1 year old. And finally there was precious little Nim, who was only 6 months old. She was to spend the holiday tucked tightly in her crib, drunk on breast milk and dreaming of sugar plums. I had a special bond with Nim, because she was the first elf harvested from me. After years of fearing I wouldn't be able to contribute new elves to the pole, Nim finally came along, my little miracle. When Santa had punished Horace, I worried he would take his anger out on Nim as well. I begged him to spare her, that it was only me who was a threat to the joyful life at the North Pole. I will always be thankful to Mrs. Claus for saving our lives that night, even if her motives were only driven by concern for our small number. Her frantic cries warned Santa that losing 2 elves, adult elves, would be unwise in the harsh winter months, and even losing 1 infant would make the future difficult. At Mrs. Claus' pleading, he decided to show us both mercy that day, only locking us in the shed for a week as penance for my failings. See, the North Pole is a wonderful land of celebration and joy, but also of discipline and reverence. We elves have few rules we must follow, but disobedience is not an option. Rule number 1, do your chores. The eldest female elves looked after the home and the food reserves in the barn and cellar. We baked, cooked, pickled, cleaned, and did all the sewing. The eldest male elves looked after the animals and performed the butchering. Sometimes, under Santa's supervision, the boys would be allowed to travel north toward the mountains to hunt rabbits and deer. Charle had always envied their trips away. Neither of us had ever traveled past the tree line. Horace would tell me all about the animals and the views that he saw during those trips. We'd sneak to the barn late at night and lie together in the hay. He'd tell me about how rocky and steep the mountains grew as you approached them, and how beautiful the sun was setting over the pole. After their 10th year, elves were expected to help look after the crops and contribute to the harvest. It was tough work for such small bodies, but we all had to do our part. Horace had been so good about helping the little ones with their more difficult chores after he had finished all of his. When they weren't in the fields, they either took care of the younger elves or assisted the older elves in more detailed tasks. This also helped them learn the jobs that they would soon be expected to perform. The youngest elves were in charge of the easier chores, such as taking care of the chickens and collecting eggs, or helping with the gardening. When all the elves did their chores, the North Pole ran smoothly, like a well-oiled machine. Even this past year, with only 12 of us, we were all able to survive. And it was indeed lucky that Chandrel and Mirren were both ripe with the next generation of elves, promising that our numbers would grow again. Rule number 2, always be joyful. Mrs. Claus told us that a smile is all you need in this world, that it was a conduit of joy. When we felt bad things, she'd shush us. Santa does not like it when the elves cry, she'd warn. But sometimes it was hard, especially for the little ones. We'd remind them to try and be joyful, even when they had stubbed their toe or skinned their knee. But still, the tears would flow around their frowns. We'd tell them that it gets easier as they grew older. They'd sniffle and nod, and we'd smile at them, rewarding their joy with cookies and candy. What I never revealed was that it was difficult to be joyful sometimes, even as an older elf, and so I had to pretend. When Mr. Claus could see my unjoyfulness seeping through my smiling face, he'd tell me to be more like the other elf girls, to be more like Chandrel or Mrs. Claus, whose warm smile never faltered. Mrs. Claus, with those ice-blue eyes, crinkled permanently by a wide, toothy smile. Mr. and Mrs. Claus said that elves were always joyful, so I used to worry that I was defective. But then I started going to the barn at night with Horace, and he told me he wasn't joyful sometimes too. I told him about how I was often not joyful. He looked me deep in the eyes and told me he felt the same, telling him that oddly made being joyful easier. Rule number 3. Only Santa may leave the pole. The only exception being when he would take the older boys hunting. Otherwise, only Santa was able to come and go, and he didn't leave only on Christmas Eve, but would leave the pole once or twice a month. I once asked Mrs. Claus what Santa did when he left, and she explained that he needed things that we couldn't provide at the North Pole. Despite her unfaltering smile, she'd sympathize with us, the girl elves, on those nights. These were the nights when Santa would visit us in our room. Most of us wouldn't be able to sleep those nights, not when we knew what was coming. He'd waken the few that he could early in the morning, our thin door banging against the wall. The sound would always reverberate through my bones as a sour scent permeated the room, making the warm air heavy over my mouth, forced forever into a smile. He'd pick 1 or 2 of the girl elves and carry us out to the shed where he would ready us for harvesting new elves. It wasn't at all like when Horace and I would go to the barn. That would be soft and painless. It hurt when Santa sewed us. I was lucky, though. Chandrel was his favorite, so I was often left alone. There was an unspoken 4th rule at the pole, that only Santa may harvest his elves. We were supposed to be pure, but Horace and I loved each other. We loved each other so much that our bodies ached to be together. And then Mr. Claus found out. He had been so proud of me, too. So proud that I had finally provided fruit for him in Mrs. Claus. It was then that he took Horace to the shed. That was the last time I saw my love, his face twisted in fear and pain as Santa dragged him through the cold, dead leaves. I cried for him openly. Mrs. Claus allowed it, even though it was not joy. She had been much kinder than Santa. The alarm rang at 6 a.m. Mrs. Claus stopped her knitting and stood at the window looking out at the winter landscape around us. Worry furrowed her brow, slightly wrinkling her otherwise joyful face. Santa Claus had never been this late getting home before. At 11 a.m., Mrs. Claus let us eat some of the feast that we had prepared so that we could go to bed without empty stomachs. I couldn't sleep, though. Instead, I listened to her walk back and forth by the front windows waiting for him. At 3 p.m., the other girl elves and I joined her in the living room. At this point, she was curled up in her rocking chair. She wasn't crying, which I was surprised by. Despite rule number 2, I understood the hurt that happens when someone you love doesn't come back. Yet, instead, Mrs. Claus rocked back and forth, her eyes glazed, staring out into nothing. She was unresponsive, her lips drawn tight, making her grim look dehydrated and skeletal. By the time 5 p.m. hit, we had abandoned her to feed the younger elves more of the Christmas feast, which now lay cold on the table. At 8 p.m., Charle called out for me to join her at the window. I hugged Nim close to my chest as I walked over to see. Charle pointed, and I immediately saw the shadowy figure which had just emerged from the tree line. Mrs. Claus jumped from her chair, pushing us aside to take a look. "Oh, thank God! He's back!" she cried, the practiced smile of joy stretching her face wide again. We continued to look over her shoulder as another shadowy figure appeared, followed by another. Soon, several shadows were walking toward the house. Mrs. Claus' face went pale, and for the first time, her smile wavered. It felt as if ice water was running down my spine. She ran to the back of the house and came barreling back moments later with a large shotgun. She brandished the weapon in front of her as she ran out the door wearing nothing but her housecoat and slippers. There was a loud bang, and she fell into the snow, which quickly turned red around her. We were too stunned to react. Within seconds, strange men were surrounding us, touching us and asking us questions in short barks. Charle smiled wildly at them, asking if they wanted some cookies and Christmas cheer. Nim and I were the only ones who cried. I haven't seen any of the elves since. The men let me keep Nim, though, which I appreciate. They gave me a cup of water and a cup of some warm, brown liquid I assumed was hot cocoa, but it was bitter and earthy. I spit it out, and the men took it away. They asked me a lot of questions, many of which I didn't understand. It was like they were speaking a different language. They asked me who my mother and father are, but I don't know what those words mean. I asked if I could go back to the North Pole, but the men only clenched their jaws without answering. Their features were sharp, and their flesh was not snowy white. They were not elves. They all looked different. It was difficult to keep them straight. They were all odd-looking, and each of them looked old, much older than Mrs. Claus. They looked like they were Santa's age. I'm alone now. This place is too bright, too cold, too metallic. The light hurts my eyes, and the coldness gnaws at my bones. Tears bite at my cheeks. I try to smile, but it's hard to even pretend to feel joy here. The warmth of Nim on my chest is the only comfort I have. She squirms, and I look down at her and try to smile again. She looks up at me, and her large, wet eyes search my features before lighting up with recognition. She smiles at me, and my heart lightens. I see Horace's smile in hers, and for the first time since he died, my smile feels real. I'm writing this as somewhat of a warning, but also a slight cry for help. I do not know who else to turn to that may take me seriously, and I know that this community is often eager to help in situations like this. A few months ago, in late July, I attended a music festival with my girlfriend Debbie. This particular festival was in a small Wisconsin town called Twin Lakes. It went on from Thursday until past midnight on Sunday, so by the time we left the last show, trudged through the mud, picked up the last of our belongings from the campsite, and drove past the stampede of fellow festival goers, it was pretty late. Her and I have attended this festival for the past 4 years. It's pretty much common knowledge amongst the community that cell phone service is completely gone after the first day. I think it's a combination of being in a small town and randomly filling a small area with thousands of people that causes the service to dissipate so quick. Because we were aware of this, we fully expected to not have use of our phone's GPS system to help us navigate the town. This didn't worry us, though, because, like I said, this was our 4th year, and had pretty much learned the route back home by now. Unfortunately, the usual route we were prepared to take was completely blocked off. We saw flashing red and blue lights in the distance and later learned one of the festival goers had been struck by a vehicle. After waiting for 20 minutes and not moving an inch, Debbie and I agreed we should try and find another way back. We pulled a U-turn and began to drive in the opposite direction. After a few minutes, we saw a side street and decided to try that out. This road, well, it was dark. Really dark. The kind of dark when you drive slow and blare your high beams, which is what I did. Being into horror films, I took the opportunity to make a comment on our creepy surroundings to Debbie. She kind of laughed, but I noticed the fear in her voice and eyes. Being the loving guy I am, I decided I'd take advantage of her fear and scare her even more. Boyfriend of the year, am I right? I switched to the auxiliary setting in the car to the radio and immediately switched to AM. I scanned one by one until I found one that was just blaring white noise. I left it on and began making comments to Debbie in different horror-inspired voices. Things like, "They're watching us," and "Tonight seems like a nice night to die, don't you think?" The crazy thing was, Debbie didn't find my hilarious jokes very entertaining and kept trying to shut the radio off. Buzzkill. I agreed to cut the act and told her it can all end if she played along a little bit by choosing one random AM station for us to listen to. With an annoyed sigh, Debbie reached over and spun the dial with little thought. The station she landed on was AM 630. She hit the spooky jackpot with that one. What we heard could only be described as a little girl singing with a high-pitched, distorted voice. I immediately began laughing at her selection, since it was exactly what I was hoping we'd find and so much more. I whipped out my phone and recorded a Snapchat video of our reactions. I continued to laugh while Debbie nervously chuckled. I actually found it strange and a bit unnerving myself, but did not want to let it show in front of her. Macho guy routine and all that. I went ahead and switched back to the auxiliary and continued our drive home. A few minutes after switching back, the music got cut off once again, and my high-pitched ringtone flooded the car with an ear-piercing jingle. The number was strange and told me it was from Russia, so I ignored it. I had recently purchased a URL from GoDaddy and made the foolish decision to not make it private, so my mobile number was made public for all the spammers to find. That meant receiving calls from randomly generated numbers. That became a common occurrence, which is why this one did not faze me too much. It did a little, though. Most of the spam numbers I received were domestic, and were received during weekday afternoons. It never received one at almost 1 a.m. on a Sunday night, let alone one from Russia. Not too long after rejecting the call, I received another. Again, it was an international number, this time from Morocco. I figured it was the same person as before, using the same random number generator, and once again ignored the number. few minutes passed when, you guessed it, another call, though this one was in fact domestic. The call was coming from Phoenix, Arizona. Since this was from inside the U.S., and I was finally angry enough to answer and chew out the solicitor on the other end, I picked up. I wish I didn't. I angrily asked, "Hello?" several times, and did not receive an answer. Usually that would be my cue to hang up, but I was annoyed and felt persistent. Not to mention Debbie was watching and, macho guy routine. I knew someone was there because I was able to hear some background static and the faint sound of someone breathing. "Hey, asshole, I know you're there. What the hell do you want? What can you possibly be trying to sell at this hour?" The silence lingered for a few more seconds before it was broken. I began to hear music, but it was not just any music. It was the same style of music we heard on the creepy radio station we'd just turned off before receiving the calls. I felt my face get flushed and sort of just frozen up, foam still in my ear. I don't know how long I sat there like that before I was snapped out of it. I hadn't realized what snapped me out of it until Debbie broke the silence in the car. What does he want?" I looked into the rearview mirror and saw what Debbie was referring to. There was a pickup truck tailgating behind us that flashed its lights. The driver did it again, just one quick burst of their high beams in our direction. I had no idea what they could have wanted. I was going 5 to 10 miles over, so it wasn't because I was impeding traffic. It was a 2-lane road with no oncoming traffic, so even if they were in a hurry, they could easily have gone around us and sped up. At this point, I was still on the phone and still had not heard anything but the music coming from the other end. For whatever reason, I did not hang up and was too distracted by the tailgate to try and pry more info from the caller. After about 30 seconds of being dangerously close to our car, the truck finally began to switch lanes in an attempt to pass us. It was dark, so I couldn't see into the driver's car through the windshield, and when they were beside us, we realized their windows were tinted very dark, definitely past the legal limit. In that moment, it didn't mean much to me, since I figured they'd pass us and be out of our hair soon. That didn't happen. The truck got in front of us and slowly began to apply their brakes. Red flags everywhere. I had read enough stories of criminal encounters to know this easily could be a trap to rob us or worse. I knew I had to be tactical to avoid any problems. Debbie, on the other hand, wasn't thinking so clearly. Feeling tired, anxious to be home, and now annoyed to her breaking point by this driver, she swiftly reached out her arm and pressed down firmly on my car horn. It wasn't the first time she'd pulled this move, and it was something that she does that I absolutely hate. I always tell her she's going to get us into some serious confrontation one day. A serious confrontation that will have to be handled by me. So I'm usually quick to grab her hand and remove it from the horn. This time, though, I was frozen. I was still on the phone with the mystery caller at this point, subconsciously transfixed on the chilling audio that was radiating into my ear. From the phone, I heard it. My car horn. It was delayed by a nanosecond and sounded far away, but I knew it was the same. I heard my car horn coming from the other end of the call. Whoever was in that truck was the person I was speaking to, the person who called us with the suspicious numbers, the person who was playing the same radio station we had randomly discovered, and now the same person who almost got us to come to a complete stop in the middle of a Wisconsin back road at 1 a.m. Fight or flight is a funny thing. It's very impressive how fast your mind can actually process information when it's fueled by fear. In what felt like the blink of an eye, my mind ran with the possibility of reaching for the baseball bat I kept in the back seat and coming at this driver with all my might. That fantasy quickly went south, as I pictured a group of men, grown, with guns spilling out of the truck, killing me, and doing God knows what to Debbie. I thank God to this day that the stupid macho guy routine came to an end right then and there. I quickly and haphazardly slammed down on the gas and swerved around the truck, picking up as much speed as I could. I might not have the fastest car in the world, but it's in pretty good condition. It was more than enough to escape the old, worn-out pickup truck that was following us. After about 10 minutes of speeding, well past the legal limit, blowing stop signs and living out all my Vin Diesel fantasies, we were back in the more sprawling, busy areas of our route. There's no sign of the truck. Debbie, who was screaming at me for the first few minutes of the escape, was reduced to quiet crying as she clutched a pillow tight to her chest. My adrenaline had worn off, and now I was feeling shaky. We'd been riding in dead silence the whole time, so I reached down to the floor of the car for my phone. I figured we can both benefit in some cheery music to help lighten the mood, since we both clearly were not eager to discuss what had just happened. I grabbed the phone and tapped the home button. The screen illuminated, and I saw that I was still in the middle of a call. I'd never hung up the phone before speeding away, and apparently neither did the mysterious caller on the other end. We approached a red light, and I slowed down to a stop. That's when I put the phone up to my ear. My breathing was undoubtedly audible at this point. At first, I was met with silence, other than the same muted white noise as before. The silence was broken by the caller. In a deep voice, I heard one sentence that filled my body with nauseating chills. "Almost had you." After that, the call was ended. I must have looked shaken because Debbie nervously asked me what was wrong. I simply shook my head without a word and continued driving. About 30 minutes later, we arrived home. At that point, we were so exhausted that we walked inside, decided to leave unpacking the car for the next day, and dropped into the bed without even bothering with showers. The next morning, I grabbed the keys and went to bring the car closer to our apartment entrance in order to speed up the process of emptying all our camping gear. I got to the car, and when I hit the unlock button on my keys, I did not hear the sound of the doors unlocking. Instead, I heard the dull thud of the locks remaining the same. In our tired days the night prior, we had neglected to lock the doors. I peeked inside the car and saw that everything seemed to still be there, including some cash that was visibly strewn across the passenger seat. I figured we'd gotten lucky and proceeded to get inside. Right away I knew something was wrong. It was a smell. Whether you know it or not, every single person has a scent. You can smell it when walked into certain homes or smelling someone's worn clothing. In that moment, I was picking up a scent that did not belong to me or Debbie. It wasn't bad, per se, but it was undeniably slightly musty with a hint of menthol. I got out of the car and inspected it once more. Again, nothing seemed out of place. I took a breath and told myself I was imagining things. Once again, I climbed into the driver's seat, this time ignoring the unusual smell. Stuck my key in the ignition and fired up the car. I almost jumped out of my skin when the radio began to play. I could have sworn we had turned it off, but hell, I thought we'd locked the doors, too. It wasn't the radio being on that scared me. It was the fact that the radio was on its loudest setting and was programmed to AM 630. I could almost hear my heart beating rapidly as I stared wide-eyed at the console. I knew for a fact we'd switched it to the auxiliary setting. I just knew it. The radio station was no longer playing the haunting sounds of the night prior, and was now projecting the sounds of some obscure talk radio or news channel. At that point, I did not have enough energy to deal with this any longer. I turned off the radio and drove the car up to our building entrance. Debbie was waiting there for me. We both looked exhausted. Without speaking very much, her and I worked together to empty the car. I parked it back in our spot, and that was that. There were no more weird calls other than the usual spam. No strange discoveries with the car, that radio station, etc. I tuned into it a few times and found that it was still the same boring news channel. Since Debbie and I live in Chicago, I figured it made sense that it would change. Things went back to normal. That is, until last week. It started when I checked my phone in the middle of my lunch break at work. I had 4 missed calls, all from random numbers. The last one was the same Phoenix number I picked up on the way back from Wisconsin. That number had left a voicemail. In the voicemail, as you may have guessed, was more of the creepy music we hear that night. There was no other sounds or voices, just the damn music. Since then, I had noticed a lot of cars with Wisconsin license plates. It's probably all in my head, I know. Cars from neighboring states is nothing crazy, but it just seems like there were way more than usual parked around our apartment, driving past me on the street, etc. I would probably be able to brush all this off if it wasn't for what happened yesterday. I was getting out of a meeting at work and checked my phone. I had 3 missed calls, 2 from random numbers. Again, nothing super unusual. And 1 from Debbie. She'd left a voicemail. Upon playing it, I almost threw up my lunch. It was the eerie music. I called her right away and she picked up after the first ring. She answered normally and I began to ask her what the voicemail was all about. At this point, I figured she was just playing a prank on me this whole time and just forgot to mask her number before making that particular call. I demanded she confess it was her, and when she finally started to cry while denying it all, I relented. I apologized for screaming at her. I explained everything that was happening for the past week and ended it all with her missed call and voicemail. It was quiet on her end. When she finally spoke, the adamant fear in her voice began to make sense. She explained to me that she couldn't have made that call. She was running errands and had been grocery shopping at our local mega-chain supermarket. In a rush to stay on schedule, she'd forgotten her phone in the car. I don't know what to do. A small part of me still suspects she may be playing a very long practical joke on me, but she has never been the prank type. And even if she was, how could she have orchestrated the radio station with a pickup truck? Doesn't add up. All I know is I haven't let down my guard for a while. I'm carrying a knife on me and I'm looking into getting my conceal and carry license ASAP. I'm going to insist Debbie does the same. She's not a fan of guns, so if she is behind this, maybe that will be what makes her confess. Has anyone in the southern Wisconsin area, by any chance, had experience with this radio station? If not, please do not access it. I can't be sure the station itself has any connection to what's been happening, but why risk it? I'm scared. I hope this ends soon. Emily, Stan, and I enjoyed our grandmother's tales. During school breaks, Mom and Dad drove the 3 of us to her home in Plimerton. It was a small coastal village, an hour's drive north of Wellington. Everything about the place was tiny. It was simple. There were 3 cafes. There was a floral shop and a small dairy shop that served fish and chips on warm Saturdays. On each journey to our grandmother's house, the 3 of us glued our faces against the car windows. We watched as the tall, dark, looming shapes of the sawmills were replaced with empty flatlands. The rush of salt to our nostrils replaced the sawdust that rained constantly over our heads. The green sky followed us, though. Whether it was in Wellington or Plimerton, the sky was there to remind us. It wanted to tell us the truth that each and every one of us will turn to wood when we die. That was fine. The stories that our grandmother enjoyed telling us pictured a time before the curse of a wooden death struck every inhabitant of New Zealand's capital, Wellington. Of strong winds that battered the city, We craned our little heads at each painting that decorated her walls. She had even showed a photo of herself as a young girl walking with 2 legs. By her storytelling days, however, our grandmother couldn't even move off of her chair. It was depressing. Who wanted to see their family member degrade into an immobile husk? Her condition was worse every visit. Grandmother's lower waist had been transformed into a thick bark. Her arms hung heavy on her sides. Her legs seemed to merge, even fuse, with the wooden floor of her home. Even her voice had started to sound croaky, like 2 boards rubbing together. Her condition grew worse each visit. Every time Mom and Dad told us that we were heading home, I wished, I hoped, and I prayed that we would get another chance to see our beloved grandmother. Emily, Stan, and I wanted to see more pictures. We wanted to listen to more tales of a Wellington long past. For Emily, she wanted to hear about the lifestyle. My brother Stan was fascinated with the landscape. I, for one, was curious about the museum. Tipapa. The Tipapa Museum was a wonderland, my grandmother described. She said that every day, different people from around the country and the world filled the museum to the brink. It was impossible to walk inside without bumping into 5 or a dozen people. Some days, she said, it was best to stand still and let the crowd guide you to your destination. The reason was simple. There was a lot to take in. Once a person stepped inside the museum, they were bound to be lost. Whether it was the natural exhibition on the 2nd floor, New Zealand history on the 3rd floor, or the Maori culture on the 4th floor, one simply could not walk around without stopping. My grandmother said that she could feel her pupils racing back and forth inside her eyes. Each pupil wanted to take in as much information that the museum provided. It was a giant building filled with laughter, joy, awe, and a great sense of local pride. I wished so badly to see what my grandmother had seen. The Tipapa had existed today was no more than an extravagant mausoleum. Its corners were sharp. Decapitated wooden heads of the museum curators looked down from the building's large wooden doors. The creamy brown paint that had once decorated the facade had been replaced with the wooden bodies of people. Each one was strung up against the others like dolls. It was disgusting. It was a mockery of the beauty that had once been. Before my grandmother died, she had told us that she had forbidden herself from visiting the city. There was no point ever going back since the curse of the wooden death appeared. It would have simply made her depressed. Wellington was a husk of its former self. The current city was nowhere near like the beautiful windswept paradise of grandmother's stories. She had wished that one day the 3 of us would be alive to see Wellington in its glory days. Yet, even back then, I knew that the chances were already stacked against us. The side of my neck had already started to harden. The skin of my brother's back felt thick like bark. As for Emily, my youngest sister, I still cannot believe that she passed away. I remember the last time I saw her. It was on a cold autumn night in May, a few days before her death. Emily and I went for drinks in the old Harbor and Sea bar in Lambton Key. It was a celebration. Emily had gotten a position as a receptionist for one of the largest sawmills in Wellington, a 200-meter-tall behemoth at the center of the city. The pay was very good. Her hours were reasonable. She even got the option to take 3 weeks' worth of paid leave per year. I wasn't sure how Emily had managed to get the job. She had only completed a bachelor's degree in accounting and had a few temporary jobs at various call centers. Had she impressed a top dog from the sawmills? Had one of her friends given a good word to someone in the company? Or was it just plain luck? Whatever the case, Emily would be paid nearly as much as my position as a secretary for the city council. She would have been proud and excited. The Emily I knew could have yelled out to every person in the bar that she had secured a big gig. I was surprised, almost worried, to watch her lean down against the bar table. A half-empty cup spun in her hands. I never really enjoyed the thought of arranging people's wooden remains to be sent to the sawmills, she confessed. I jugged a glass. I hiccuped. You can always give the position to me. I'd do anything to avoid crossing paths with that pig of a counselor, Jonathan Wales. Did you have my pay? She slammed her palm on my back. Yeah. Nah, sis. I'm keeping it, thank you very much. Just because I hate the kind of work I must do doesn't mean I hate the pay. Plus, I heard that my table was crafted from the body of an all-black. My option still stands. Working for the city council will be great. I hiccuped again. The bartender, with a wooden jaw, passed me 2 glasses of water. Emily raised her cup. The bartender answered with another pour. It is traditional, anyway. Once I save enough money, I'll buy a huge property near Plimerton and set up a business where instead of chopping people up, we can make them, I don't know, human trees? Oh, you're just trying to live like Grandma, eh? That's so cute. I said, drinking my glass. Your house is still standing if you want it. Yeah, but no, Emily said with a smile as I caught a few guys staring idly at both of us from the far corner. You were always her favorite. I patted her shoulder. It had been 20 years since Grandma passed away. Emily was only 6 when Mom and Dad brought the 3 of us to the nearest sawmill to watch our dear Grandma be sawed and hacked to pieces. I guess I get why Grandmother exiled herself, she said, gulping her glass in one go. It is too depressing. I don't want to spend time in this city here any longer. I don't want to see mangled corpses in the middle of the streets. I don't want to watch them hauled onto the back of trucks or chopped up as firewood. You can always try being a model, I said as I hiccuped. You know, to cheer people up. Emily tilted her head. I was being serious there, I insisted. You can start by not being so gloomy all the time, Emily. Come on, cheer up. You'll start a new job next year. You'll be as rich in an instant. We can plan the celebration party now if you want. Let's leave all these problems for the future, Emmy. We have enough trouble as it is without thinking that we're going to end up as furniture. Plus, you still haven't had any physical trace of bark in you yet. So, you're saying that actually should become a model? She pushed her hair behind her ear. Am I really that, sexy? The same guys in the corner glanced down at her soft, fleshy, long legs. Emily giggled, raising a glass up to her head. I hadn't realized that I was drop-dead attractive. Everyone! I apologize for looking so sexy. Maybe it was my looks that gave me a position as receptionist for a major sawmill. Emily, I groaned. She sat, head lowered, and cheeks puffed in pink. Sorry, sis. Ego got the better of me. If it makes you happy, you're still my favorite sibling. You're not a dickhead like Stan. God, I hate our brother's guts. He thinks he's so great and mighty. I almost wanted to feel sorry when I heard that his back is turning to wood. Almost. It's everyone's burden. I called the bartender for another round. Seriously, just for once, I just want to know who or what did Wellington fuck up so badly that it left us with his stupid curse. She muttered and let a lock of her blonde hair to fall over her face. Grandmother said that the god of the wind was defeated by the god of the forest. That's why everyone is turning to trees, I replied. That's why everyone is turning into trees. I wish it was that simple, Emily said. How do you kill off the god of the forest, anyway? Wellington was better off when it was scorched with 100-kilometer winds, like in the old days, you know? I sipped my glass, nodding. You're really not taking me seriously, eh, Natalie? Emily elbowed my shoulder. Anyway, after one more drink, I'll call it a night. You were right. We have enough shit to worry about. I'll do my best with my new job and work my way to get another property near Plemmerton. I still have a few forms left to fill out tonight, though. Fuck, I hate doing this at the last minute. Don't forget to sleep early, I said pointedly. Of course, she said and craned her neck back. I heard enough of that scolding from you and Stan to last a lifetime. I'm not going to sleep at 3 a.m. like I used to. 11 p.m. is my latest, that's a promise. I later found out that Emily indeed tried to keep her promise. It was overdose. That's what my brother Stan had told me over the phone. I felt my stomach lurch. My throat smelt like vomit when I learned that Emily had been found dead. A bottle of sleeping pills lay beside her bed. It was no surprise how she did it. At age 26, Emily Ritchie would have been another young victim. The local obituary would have labeled her as part of a growing number of people who wanted to escape the fate of watching their own bodies transform into a bark. Yet she hadn't. That was the worst part. When Stan relayed the information that our youngest sibling had died with no trace of wood in her body, I heard distinct cheering on the other end of the line. It sounded like 20 or 30 people laughing in the background. My brother told me that I should be happy that Emily had died this way. Normally, it would have taken no more than 3 hours before the corpse would resemble a mannequin. Even the morgue staff kept a 24-hour watch for any sign, any trace of bark inside or outside her skin. There was none. Emily had done it. She had beaten the impossible. At this point, I suppose I should say that I should have celebrated. My brother reminded me that Emily wouldn't have to face the towering sawmills that dwarfed every building in the city. The thought of my youngest sister being chopped into pieces and turned into furniture was whisked away. There was no longer any need to worry about that. Emily will be safe. She will be preserved. She will be the new chosen one who will be displayed among the decaying corpses within Tipapa. All my relatives cheered out at the news that one of our own had beaten the wooden curse. The city council was quite quick to proclaim the good news to the people. Not only had they given us $100,000 as a gesture of gratitude, but they set up a new exhibition at Tipapa, all as a token to Emily's death. In the beginning, Jiry, the Maori god of the winds, waged war against his brothers. He attacked Tane, the god of the forest, and forced the god of the sea to wage war against the former. The gods of food took refuge and hid from Jiry's onslaught. It was only the god of war, Tumatetwenga, that stood a chance and forced the god of winds to withdraw. Ever since that day, my grandmother had said that Wellington was Jiry's home. It was obvious. Wellington had been considered as the windiest city in the whole country. The strong 100-kilometer gale force that could batter numerous towns in New Zealand was an everyday occurrence that everyone had gotten used to. A day within Wellington wouldn't be complete without watching an army of thick giant clouds spiraling around the city like a whirlpool. Those were Jiry's children. The winds and the clouds were the god's army against his brothers. Jiry commanded them to storm the seas. He ordered his children to uproot trees and scatter the crops off the ground. Whether the god of wind was defeated by an alliance of his brothers or not was uncertain. It was always obvious that their presence was now gone. Wellington was no longer the windiest city in the country. It was dry. It was still, like some forgotten ruin left to decay on its own. The great fleets, two clouds that had once proudly sailed the city, had been replaced by an inky dark green sky. The showers of sawdust that poured out from the sawmills took over from the winds. The only trace that Tohiri and his children were ever here being faint, fleeting clouds in the shape of a silent scream. There were quiet breezes. A gust came and went. Pitter-patter of rain held on for a morning. Yet none of them shook off the dry, humid weather that had devoured the city. There was no God to welcome me to the first day of Emily's exhibition. Only Stan. Kia ora, Natalie. I'm glad to see that the curse hasn't taken you yet. My brother greeted me at the museum's entrance. His brown hair, which had once tried to grow, was shortened. He combed it back, revealing a wooden crack on his forehead. He'd grown bulkier since the last time I'd seen him, almost stiff. Maybe it was the large brown jacket that he wore. It was May, after all, and winter was just around the corner. I could already sense, almost smell, the roasted wooden bodies who were chosen to be firewood for Wellington. It's good to see you again, Stan. I hugged him, feeling the hardness of the wood that consumed his back. How are you keeping up? How's the family? They're doing great. The kids are being babysit now. I don't think they have realized that their Auntie Emily has died. They heard about her becoming the city's nearest darling, but they still don't get that people need to die to achieve that honor. I brought my wife, though. She's upstairs with the rest of the family. Mom and Dad must be gushing here about the grandkids. And you, I asked, how is your condition going? You sound like I'm going to die, Nat. This is your brother you're talking to. It's all sorted out. My local carpenter told me that even though my back has been taken over, I won't have to worry for a decade or two until the curse takes me. My wife got the gall to schedule me an appointment with a cabinet maker. I swear that I married the most awesome woman in the city. He paused, placing a hand on my shoulder. I felt the tip of a finger rubbing the thick bark on the side of my neck. I realized that it's hard for you to be here, Nats. I don't think I'm ready to see Emily's dead body, and the last thing I wanted to do is join some sick party. I'm only here because the rest of the family's here. You know me, Stan. I can't stand being the oddball. I'm not surprised. You're the motherliest type between the three of us. But that's fine. That's fine. Emily's the spoiled little princess, while I'm the more, well, let's just say, extravagant? Show-off? I cut him off. Seriously, Stan, did you really put on a show when you called me that day? I can't believe you. I know that you and Emily didn't get along well, but that... Really? My colleagues decided to come over after work for a few beers, he said, and shrugged. Right, and they started shouting. Emily will decay because that's what people do when they hear that someone has beaten the curse. He placed an arm around my shoulder and led me inside the entrance hall of the museum. The place was empty except for a headless wooden body at the center. It pointed its arms toward a stack of stairs in front of us. The figure's stump was bathed by the warm blue lights of the ceiling. The low hum of the air conditioner drowned the buzzing sound of the sawmills from outside. I could even see a faint flicker of a fire off the Wellington harbor and the shadows of trucks near the docks. Soon, the Lambton parade will be on its way. Deemed unworthy or useless by the sawmills will be spread across the city. I can also imagine, almost hear, an army of Wellingtonians marching toward the streets with axes and machetes, all ready to be hacked by their former city folk as firewood. For now, it was too quiet. I felt as if I had stepped inside an empty church dedicated to the holy decaying bodies of Wellington City. Each wall dedicated to a painting or a photograph of Wellington in its glory days. I wondered if the people in these pictures knew what the future of their city would be like. Their smiling faces and quiet laughs were different from the sighs and grindings that I saw every day. Were there any signs of Tohiri's defeat back then? Grandmother told us that the city was unaware of any warning that would bring its downfall. Maybe there was none. Maybe everything that is happening now was beyond our limit. Maori gods have done this to us. Maybe they would fix it. My grandmother used to say. We can only hope. Where's the rest of the family? I asked as I scratched the wooden bark of my neck. They're on the 4th floor. That's where the exhibition will take place. Mom and Dad got a bit worried that you weren't here yet and asked me to fetch you, knowing you'll be conflicted over Emily. You won't believe how many people turned up for this day. I don't even know most of them, or how they're related to us. Oh, I wish Grandma was here to see this. I whispered. Do you think she'd be proud? Stan asked as we climbed the wooden stairs, passing over a series of old photos of the Tapapa Museum in its glory days. She would still be rooted in her old home in Plimerton. She had said that she was in self-exile. I'd like to think that Grandma would make an exception, I said. Emily always was her favorite. She used to give her the first taste of cookies since she was the only one small enough to sit on her lap. I remember how you and I used to fight for that position. We even made numerous alliances to get Emily off Grandma's special list. I smirked, catching glimpses of dark silhouettes of the sawmills from the window. I bet she wasn't planning to die that night. Stan said as he chipped off a piece of bark from his head. Emily was a klutz. I bet she must have taken one pill too many. I told her to stop that, I said. You can't really blame all of it on yourself, Nat. It's Emily's fault for drinking all those energy drinks non-stop during university. We kept warning her that it would affect her sleeping pattern, but that girl was too stubborn and pretentious to listen. Just because she was pretty doesn't mean she had common sense. You remember how she caught me taking away her valuable caffeine drinks? I forced a smile. Emily ranted a whole night, saying how you were the worst brother ever. She even avoided me for a whole month, he chuckled. I ruined that by popping by her place one night. Oh, that girl wasn't keen to see me. And now Emily's dead. I clenched my fist. Stan, I was with her a few days before she passed away. If I had known something was wrong, or if she had told me about her sleeping problems, I could have. There was nothing we could do. We could, I said. I was there. Natalie, my brother, gripped my arm. Please, enough. You're not the only one who's grieving. I may not look like it, but I miss Emily as well. We used to hate each other's guts. I swear our brother-sister rivalry was a bloody comedy sketch. But now that she's gone, I'm not even sure what to do. Stan, he continued, eyes narrowed. Did you want to see her being turned into timber, Natalie? I can still remember how men in white uniforms took our grandmother's wooden body and turned her into a piece of chair. I still have nightmares thinking about her body, how it was hacked by a buzzsaw. Seriously. Nat, who would want a grave like that? No one. Be happy, Nat, please. It's too late for us already. We will face those damn sawmills one day. But Emily, she will be here as long as time passes. She will be a model, a light for everyone who faces the chainsaws. I smiled a little. It was ironic, almost a sick parody, that my advice to Emily in becoming a model rather than a receptionist came true. Her beautiful young body would be displayed for all people to see. I imagined the public gawking with wide eyes as they approached her. It was no surprise. Those who had achieved the state of natural death were people either in their 70s or late 80s. It was rare, almost unheard of, for someone so young to defeat the curse of a wooden death. The youngest person before Emily was a 40-year-old man who was found drowned off the coast of Red Rocks. Since then, it's been elderlies. It was clear that the city folk were baffled. Prior to the exhibition, the city council declared that Emily's body was a rank 1 relic. Rather, to have her body slowly decay, like most of the inhabitants of the museum, she would be perfectly preserved. She will be a still frame. Generations into the future, people will ask the museum staff who she was. How had she done it? What did she eat? What was her secret? I'll be pissed if the local news reports a huge sale in sleeping pills. If that happens, I'm going to whomever made the report and tell them just because my sister had defeated the curse doesn't mean that people know everything about her. It's already bad enough that our youngest sister will permanently reside within the wooden walls of this museum. When I was a young girl, I played a game called headhunting. The rules were simple. For every visit to the museum, my classmates and I aimed to count as many heads as we could find. It was an easy game since there were countless faces that jutted off each stack of timber. We gave 1 point for the heads with blank expressions, 2 points went for the faces who were sad or afraid, and finally, a total of 3 points for those with a smile, a frozen semblance of laughter etched in their wooden faces. It was a fun game. Most children and some of my teachers were happy to sacrifice an hour for a few rounds of headhunting. My biggest record was 206. I was slightly tempted to try and beat the number as Stan and I made our way upward. The faces that I had counted when I was 14 were mostly gone. That was the beauty of the headhunting. Every year, 100 or 2 of these wooden boards were replaced. It was always fun darting around the tall, steep walls of the museum to find new faces that hadn't been there before. The constant smell of decay and the sight of peeling flesh from old bodies that suffocated the second and third floors was nowhere near the thrill of finding a new face. I wished I had that same excitement when Stan and I reached the museum's 4th floor. Boarded shut by thick wooden panels, the top floor of the museum was the beating heart of Te Papa. It was the holiest of places for Wellington City, a site where a selected few were granted the right to be a still image forever. Though it wasn't exactly closed to the public, a normal person must pay a hefty $300 ticket, and even that was limited for only 3 hours. I'd been there once as part of my work with the city council. It was a short visit. I think it was only a half hour at most, but even then, I could still picture myself basking under a soft white and yellow glow from the ceiling. The floor was white. The scent of sweet incense lifted me off my feet. Tinakutu, Tinakutu, Tinakutu Katua. Greeting to the families, the proud families of Wellington's newest treasure, Tenarawa Atakwe. The pot-bellied figure of Councillor Jonathan Wales stood on top of a makeshift stage. A giant statue of Jiry, the god of the wind, stood silently behind him. The councillor welcomed an army of wooden bodies below him. It was a mangled contortion of wood and flesh that ruined the serenity of the 4th floor. Branches sprouted from necks, whole legs were entombed by soft carpets of algae, and the army cheered. They shouted my sister's name over and over, raising their arms and craning their heads back. I rubbed the hardest part of my neck. Nails tried to claw the bark from my flesh. I felt sick. The thought that I would join this army was unimaginable. I wanted to get out of the building at that very moment. I didn't want to see the perverted sight in front of me. I didn't want to listen to wood cracking and turning. My grandmother was right. Emily was right. There was no point staying in the city that was the shadow of itself. I didn't want to see my boss running his bony fingers over a large curtain-covered glass case beside him. He caressed it, He lifted the bottom part a few centimeters up before letting go. Each moment, he described the beauty of Emily Reach. He told everyone that she was a prize worth dying for, how her flesh was serene, soft. You want to touch her hair? To rub her lips? You wish to whisper to her ear that she is beautiful. Why, the counselor shouted. His bloated belly hugged the case as the crowd cheered. This is our city's newest treasure, our Puipuiaki, Emily Riche, Tinarawa Atukwe. Thank you very much. He paused. His beady eyes scanned the room before he rubbed his head. He lowered his voice. And no, I almost forgot. We cannot celebrate the Rerahua, the beauty of our beloved daughter, without thanking her parents, the Juana that gave her to us. Nuaumai Hiramai. Stan grabbed my arm at this point as Mom and Dad walked up to the stage. Their bodies were woody and stiff. Their heads were the only part themselves untouched by the curse. Yet they smiled. Their faces were covered with tears, knowing their wish, their hope, that one of us would defeat the curse had come true. Let's go, Natalie, Stan said, walking forward. His breath was ragged. His eyes were glued to the glass case upon the stage. Stan became a man possessed. I could tell that he badly wanted to see what was behind the curtain. He didn't mind if he walked straight through the army, bumping, crashing, and bruising both of us against the hard surface of our wooden family. I wanted to tell him to stop. I wanted to beg him to slow down. He was hurting me. There was no need to rush. There was time. The city council had informed us that Emily's immediate family would have unlimited free access to the 4th floor as gratitude. I wanted to protest, but all I could muster were gasps. The back of my neck became flustered, almost hot. In the back of my mind, a little voice told me to celebrate. It told me that I could once again see my dear sister, that the three of us will be united. And as Stan and I reached the front, wooden hands pushed us forward. I fell on my knees, only to look up at the beautiful, nude corpse of my youngest sister. I opened my mouth. The uniform gasp of all my relatives conquered whatever words I mustered. She's beautiful, declared the voice in my head. Emily Riche is beautiful, I repeated, my face now fully infected by the wide, toothy smile of everyone around. Tinarawa Atukwe.
Chilling tales for dark nights.